Hello, welcome to today's video. Now, most of you would have used or at least come across column totals. So you got a total sitting above the column header, and perhaps you got lots of columns going across with totals above each one. Now, in my experience, whichever function is used, a sum or SUMIF or even a subtotal, they typically have a from and a to address specified. So when extra data is added, you need to modify the formulas to include those rows. So I'm going to show you how you can make this dynamic and not have to worry about that. Now here's a typical static formula. So we're going to sum from E7, the first data row, to E14, the last one. Clearly not dynamic. In some cases, the formulas will just be extended down, perhaps 1,000 rows, in anticipation for future data. Okay, but that's not completely dynamic. So how do we do this then? First step is to find the last used row. And to do that, we're going to use this formula that's quite well documented out there on the web, so I'm not going to take any credit for it. And it's this lookup. It searches for the value 2 inside this vector or this array that's returned by this part of the formula. Now I'll come back to the 2 and the 1 shortly. So what it's doing here is it's searching column C for non-blanks. So it'll return true for non-blank rows and false for blank rows. So that array of trues and false is then divided into the 1. So true is treated as 1 and false is treated as zeros. So as you can imagine, you're going to have an array of ones and errors. The lookup will then search for the value 2 in that array. Now it's going to ignore the errors, and because all we have left is the ones, it can't find 2. So what it does is it returns the last value that is less than 2. And that's why we use 2. It just has to be a number that is greater than 1, since we're only going to have ones and errors. Okay, and so when it finds the last one, it's actually finding the last non-blank row. And since we want the row number, our return value here, we put a row around the actual column. Now, one thing to keep in mind, whichever column you use as the lookup, you need to make sure that whenever there is data, that column will always have a value in it. So for example, if I just add state and a value to the month here with no product, the last row is still counted as the one before because there is no product specified. Once I add one, as you can see, it's updated to row 15. So how do we use this in the formula? So just like the static one, we have where we have a from, then a colon, then a to. We're going to do the same with dynamic. All right, so we have the from, the colon, but the to is an index. So it's looking up column E and returning row that's specified in B1, which is 14, the last row. Okay. So as we add a row, you can see the dynamic total has automatically included that, whereas the static hasn't. The last row is increased to 15. So in our formula, B1 returns 15. So it says return row 15 of column E. All right. Now the problem with both of these is if part of your process for adding new data or updating, refreshing the data, if you first delete the existing data, you're going to get a ref error, okay? Because the first data row has been deleted. Okay, so what typically is done is the start address is usually the header. So as you can see here, instead of starting from the first data row of 7, we're starting from the header row for both static and dynamic. Okay, so let's delete the data, and we shouldn't get the ref error. We get 0, which is correct. However, if you look at the static formula, it's changed it to be sum of just the header. Okay? Because the dynamic one hasn't changed. So if we were now to add new data and come into here and add a total, you'll see that the dynamic one automatically includes it, but the static doesn't, because it hasn't updated to cover that range. Okay. Now, another thing to consider is if your header is a number, such as a date, since Excel treats dates as numbers, it will add that to the total because we're including the header. All right. So in that case, what we can do is modify the formula to exclude the header. Now, how do we do this? We don't want to specifically specify the first data row. We don't want to include the header. So like we did with the last row, we're going to use an index. And this index is going to tell us which is the first data row. So it's going to look up column I and return the row number that's in B2, which is the header row, plus 1. So it's saying, give me the first row after the header. Now, we could simply just specify the first data row as a number, okay? And that'll work, except if we insert a row above here, as you can see, it's now including the header, and that's because the first data row is now 8, but this hasn't changed. It's still 7 because it's hard-coded. Same as if you deleted a row. So what we do instead, let's put that formula back. We're using the value in B2, which is a formula. And this formula is just a row of the header row. So as you insert a row, that reference will automatically change to 7. And so we get row of row 7, which is 7. Likewise, if we delete it, it goes back. It's now row 6. So this is dynamic. Right, and I'll show you here. We'll add a date, and it hasn't included it. Right. Now there is a issue though with this one, and that is if we do have a number and we delete the data, it's going to include the header, and the reason for this is the last row is the header, and the first data row is header plus 1, and so it's adding these two. All right, but we can fix that easily by just putting an if condition in front of it. So you see here we have if the last row is greater than the header row, then we do our sum as per the previous formula. Otherwise we return 0. Okay, I'll show you right here. We'll put the date in again. This time it will not add it, even if I delete the rows here. There you go. Now, I would do this anyway, because if you one day decide we want to show the year in here and perhaps change the format. We change the format to that. Okay. Then, as you see, S is a number, so it gets included. All right. Whereas this one doesn't. I can just put this back and show you. So I would go with this formula just to be on the safe side. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. One other thing I just wanted to point out is this will work with both 365 and non-365 versions of Excel. If you're using Microsoft 365, instead of index, you could replace that with choose row, but either way it will work. So you could do choose row, specify your column, and then the last row or the header row. Okay, but in this version that I have, it doesn't have the choose row function. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you found this useful. Please hit the like button if you did, and we'll see you on the next video.